Okay, I'm back with Annalisa's project. So the first thing we want to do is take a look at her statement. We've got our first image here, and we've got a cloudy day potential here. Um, I think there's a couple of things that I would change as well. The car is kind of in the shadow, and this was the right day. This was the right kind of day for shooting outside. So I'm really glad you did that, because look at how nice and true all the colors are, and how minimal and soft the shadows are. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get the exact right exposure for everything, or not have to edit. And there's a couple of things that some strong points and a couple of things that are weak points. And one thing for me is the car. I think that it needs to be much more obvious. It's the one thing that serves as the focal point. It's the one thing that's kind of an anomaly from everything else that's in the picture. And you need to get in there with your Photoshop software, mask out the car, and it would be very easy to just bring up some of those highlights. If you can see, it's kind of getting lost here in the shadows. And so I'd like to see you maybe go back and work on that a little bit. Another thing that I would say about the composition, and this can be somewhat resolved through cropping, but of course it's always better when you do this with your camera instead. I see where you're applying the rule of thirds. However, I think what I would recommend is, instead of having this area over here be, the third that has less going on, or whatever, this is also a nice, almost but not completely empty area. And what's happening in here is a lot more interesting than what's happening on this side. And I'm wishing that maybe you had put the frame at the edge of your frame here, about where my pointer is, so that the car is included. For the most part, the driveway is very distracting. It's a strong diagonal. It's one of the most contrasty things in there, and I don't think it needs to be in there. And that could be just a matter of moving a few degrees to the left or right. And if you did that, say you cut it off here, that would buy you a little extra space over here, because I would love to see this area that I'm kind of making a circle with right now. Whoops, sorry about that. Didn't mean to do that. I'd like to see a lot more of that. Okay, so I see a lot of room for editing as well. What tends to happen a lot is, when we meter for the sky, that is great. But we still are going to have some shadows and some highlights that we need to pull out in the shadowed areas. Okay. This one, I would probably say the same thing. It's a pretty clean shot. I think that there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening inside the car that could probably be played up more. The thing that I am most drawn to right now, and the thing that I think is the most interesting about this photograph, is this reflection of the trees that you have in the window. And I also think the space around the car is really interesting. In fact, I think the window of the car and the space around it are more interesting than the rest of the car. And perhaps that is because I'm just not getting that much, dramatic contrast where I could be getting it on the body of the car. You know, once again, it's getting kind of lost down here, you know, where the light's not reaching it. And your sky looks great. It's a gorgeous blue sky, and I like it when they, you know, come in kind of dark like that when you have some cloud cover. It's really, really ideal. Um, you know, your ground seems to be glowing a little bit, but I think maybe what I would do is step back a little bit. I got a little piece of driveway poking out right here, but of course that would be so easy to fix because you've got Photoshop and you can just do like a content aware fill or something like that, and boom, it's gone. I think I might like to see a little more foreground in this and a little more background. And yet at the same time still have this area played up some. This is one that I think could still be edited, or if you have a few other shots like this one um, that are, you know, just maybe a little bit farther back, you know, or a different focal length, you know, slightly wider focal length, perhaps slightly shorter focal length. I'm sorry. Potential for a lot of drama right here. Whenever we, you know, there's whenever we cut something like that, it's it's very unexpected, and you know, I think that there's some really, really awesome stuff going on in this picture. However, it's not getting to shine, you know, the way it should. You know, what happens is the eye is drawn to the contrasty areas, and so we've got this, you know, the areas where we have the absolute most contrast, and it's also very busy. You know, there's lots of pattern happening up in here. It's, you know, this tree silhouetted up against the sky, and that's a very, very interesting thing. And it's especially interesting that, you know, this should be much, much, much more dominant here, because the really, really cool stuff that's happening is just really, really hard to see. And you know, one of the things that's fun about photographing glass is it's almost like you kind of get a double exposure sometimes, because you can see a reflection of one thing and yet you can still see through it. So it's like you can see the reflection of the tree and the, you know, the other trees kind of overlapping each other. Really, really, is there a better way that we could set this up to feature this a little bit more? You know, because kind of the way it's working right now, it's kind of telling us, oh, hey, here's the focal point. You know, this is leading us in, and there's this nice big kind of open area, and you know, there's this kind of curve coming along the top of the tree, which brings the eye, and you know, our eye kind of goes right to this, you know, dinky little tree right here, which is very, very anticlimactic after all the fabulous things that you have going on up in here. This one I think could be taken care of just with some cropping in Photoshop. You know, maybe you know, lose a little bit of it, you know, but ideally I would just say, you know, hopefully you've got some images, some other images of this that you're positioned slightly differently. Go back and look at them, you know, and see if you've got one that plays this area up better and has a, you know, better composition. And watch your horizons too, you guys. Even if the even if you accidentally shoot the horizon crooked, you've got a super easy fix for that in both Photoshop and Lightroom. Okay. This one, you know, again, I think this is a very interesting device, a very interesting technique, and I think it's almost working here. I personally really like photographs that take advantage of the space that's close to the camera, and just really, really kind of almost like that car is getting in my space. But again, I'm going to say the same thing that I had said on the others. I sure would like to see more of this and less of this. You know, because again, just because of the lack of contrast here and the extra contrast here, the most beautiful part of the picture is lost. Now, this one I think you could crop. Maybe you could even turn this one into a vertical. Can you see where I'm kind of drawing, or maybe a square format? If you see where I'm kind of drawing a line with my cursor right now, maybe you could crop about a third of that just completely out and let it be a square format. And another thing I just want to point out about composition is be careful when things appear to touch. You know, this was a device that you guys used on your force perspective last week, you know, where you had something in the foreground look connected to something off in the distance. Well, we don't want that unless we're trying to trick the eye. And a real easy fix for that is to just position yourself a degree or two to the right or to the left so that we have either a distinct overlap or a distinct gap between these two objects. Now what's going on over is also interesting over here. And there could be a way to frame the shot where maybe if you came and stood over here, like say where my cursor is now, got more of the hood of the car, less of the driveway, and more of what's happening over in here, because I think there's some cool stuff that could be brought out with a little editing. And honestly, this pole would be so easy to get rid of in Photoshop. It would be, and I have no problem with you guys using Photoshop to get rid of those little things. If it's not adding to the picture, it's taking away from it. You can get rid of this, with your patch tool or your clone tool. You can do a content aware fill on this, or there's a number of different techniques that you could use to just eliminate this very distracting thing. So, I'm just gonna say on these, you're getting close, but I think you're having a hard time recognizing where, or realizing how to pull out the, the real beauty of of what you see. So I think a lot of it is coming down to composition and editing. Okay, but it's an interesting. This one's great. It's really an interesting, that this piece of this car just kind of appears everywhere. It might even be kind of interesting if this series, instead of all being kind of on the same property, um, maybe you took different pictures around different areas, different locations, and had little bits and pieces of the car in the foreground, and like that's the one thing that's always constant. But this is really, really cool. You've got your three dogs just kind of passed out doing what dogs do in the afternoon. I find this sign a little distracting, especially since the dogs are kind of small. This, contrast makes your eye come to this a little bit more, and we could get rid of that easy enough. You've got some really cool things happening. I just want to point out this arc right here. We haven't really talked very much about implied lines, but here's an actual line, and our eye will sometimes just kind of keep going. And if that curve were to just keep going, to extend, boom, it's going to take us right to this dog right here. And that's kind of cool. I really like that you're using a shallow depth of field. Um, I like that you're playing around with this idea of the window being part way up and part way down. But again, you could still do that, and I think have the window more rolled up than rolled down, so that we get more of what's interesting, what's happening here. If we had a whole lot of that right in here instead of the interior, which is kind of flat and dull and uninteresting. And see, if that were the case, then I think that the subject of the series would almost change, and it wouldn't necessarily be about the car. It would actually be about the reflections that are playing and dancing around on the car. Really nice work on this. I'm going to go ahead and click over to the conclusion so everybody can get a chance to read it. And I'll just kind of wrap up on this critique saying that I think this is a very ambitious effort. I think that the idea and the aesthetic has a lot of potential. I don't think that has been, fully brought out just yet. So work on it. It can take an average picture like this and make it dazzling, make it just absolutely brilliant. Okay, so good work. Okay, and I'm back now with Elizabeth. So let's go ahead and take a look at her statement. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with this one. We've got a waterscape, a series of water pictures, and very interesting that it appears as though you've chosen to go black and white with this. The first thing that well, probably the first thing my eye is drawn to is the focal point, which is that fountain right there. And, she's very, very clearly used the rule of thirds, to put that water fountain, yeah, that water spray just right there. I don't think it would hurt much if you were to maybe shift the horizon and the fountain down just a little tiny bit. The reason being, I'm glad that you left a lot of room. We talked about, hey, if there's an interesting sky, let the sky dominate. If there is an interesting ground plane, let the ground dominate. And, that's what she's done here. Very, very interesting. But just for a little tiny bit more balance, what one thing is that I feel about like things with edges touching, either leave some space between an object and the edge of the frame, or go ahead and crop it, but don't just kind of be on the fence with it, because it just, I think it would look good if the top of your frame was about to where the top of my cursor is right now. It wouldn't cost you a lot. You'd maybe lose, like, say, from here down, or just maybe slightly repositioning. I just feel like even though you're very, very clearly adhering to the rule of thirds, remember that that is a guideline. It's not like an exact measurement. And so if it feels right, to shift it a little bit one way or the other, it still complies. But sorry about that. But I think it's a nice image. A lot of room for bringing out some highlights in here. One of the things we need to work on in black and white photography is we really lose a lot of detail in areas once they start to get real dark. And when you guys are reading about the zone system in Ansel Adams' work, you'll because your next project is black and white, so you'll get a chance to learn how to make areas like this look a little bit better. Okay, and I'll probably say the same thing here. I don't think that this one is as interesting as this. That seems to me the water is a little bit blown out here. This one has a lot more stuff going on. A lot more interesting reflections, which I do also think you could play up a little bit. I think that you could kind of darken some of those a little bit. This one does not seem to have the drama for some reason. It's almost the same composition, but kind of a mirror image of it. You've kind of moved to the other side of the pier a little bit, and in this particular case, since the water it isn't really all that interesting. Perhaps it would be if you came in and like did some burning on some of the shadows and midtones, to sorry about that, to exaggerate the texture. That's something you could do, but it's just feeling a little bit like you've taken most of the information in the picture and tried to kind of cram it all up in here. So again, I really appreciate that you are very strictly adhering to that rule of thirds. But you know, again, keep in mind that there's some playroom with that, and so you know, if you need to kind of use little guides on your camera viewfinder, you know, to kind of get it set up, then turn those little guidelines off, and you kind of generally know where your composition is. Now, kind of move your camera around just a little until it feels right. And again, there's really interesting stuff going on in here that I think our eye is really curious about, you know, that we would really like to see. And so it's almost kind of like it's a little bit of a tempting or like a tease here, like, oh, look at this really cool stuff, but you don't get to look at it. Okay. Horizon's crooked on this one, so this would be a pretty easy fix with either Photoshop or Lightroom. If you know, it is sometimes hard to get the horizon just the way you want it, um, but it's just super easy to fix in the editing software. That this one I think could be very interesting if it wasn't so blown out and if it wasn't tilting, because you have an interesting um, silhouette here that I, you know, I think this is the strength of the picture right here is there's almost like a balance happening on the top side of this line and balancing against the bottom side of this line. It's not like a reflection, but this seems to balance this tree out very nicely. The spray from the fountain seems to balance out the texture in these trees very nicely. But it needs the sky and the water around it to draw your eye in. And right now, this is a you know, this is an exposure situation. It's really tricky, you guys. I know it's really tricky to, you know, get it to all work. My thing that I do with landscapes, this is just something that works for me. Is I will sometimes intentionally underexpose a little bit when I'm shooting in RAW because that helps me get that darker sky, and it's so easy to come in with, you know, like dodge and burn or you know, with a mask and bring out some highlights in those dark areas. For whatever reason, I find it easier to introduce highlights to an area that's too dark, as opposed to darkening an area that's too light. Now, you could do a little bit of both, but there's a lot going on that we're just really missing out on here. And this is something that doesn't need to be there. That would be easily fixed with content-aware fill. Okay, this is probably the most interesting one so far. Why? Well, you really nailed it on this reflection right here. You know, if anything, I wouldn't mind having you get a little closer, or, you know, moving in, if you have a longer possible focal length on your lens, perhaps doing that. This one, I think, just almost hits the mark. You know, we could use a lot more contrast back in here. You don't have to worry about there being so much contrast back here that it's going to be distracting from this, because this is very almost overpowering right here. You know, it's actually a little bit blown out in a couple of areas, and you know, it's tricky, you guys, when you're taking pictures of reflections. They can be incredible. They can take something and make it just really abstract. It's really nice, but you know, just trying to kind of meter so that you get, you know, this area looks beautifully exposed, and this area here looks kind of, oh, I wish there was a lot more texture happening over here. So you know, you might want to think about going back on some of these and applying some selective edits to you know, masked off areas, and I think you'll see a huge difference in, you know, taking an average picture and making it look really good. Okay. Got a little bit more sunshine coming out in this one, but I think that this one has better value range than the others. I love the little duck in the foreground, kind of observing everything that's going on. Again, I think that there's a lot of potential for some really cool dramatic texture happening here in the foreground if it had enough value contrast, enough lights and darks to compete with the very, very strong and severe contrast that we have on the pier right here. And I think that's kind of the appeal of this is that the way the light's hitting it, it's so either light or dark. It's very, very contrasty. It's very dramatic in doing that. It might be fun to try a few compositions where I think no matter what you do, you must be in a boat or something. It seems like you're in the water. You're gonna have water in the foreground no matter what. It might be interesting to just play around with a little less of the foreground and a little bit more of your most interesting area. It's kind of oh, I wish there was a little bit more of this. I wish the pier was kind of you know doing this so that maybe you've got say a third here and then another third here for the bottom of the pier, something like that. But the little duck looking on, that's great. Okay. This one's really interesting. This one I really like as a composition. The first thing that my eye goes to is this slope, this kind of swooping line that you have right here. And it's really, really nice in black and white. Horizon is crooked a little bit, at least it looks that way to me. Um, there might be some stuff that you could play up along here on the sand. I would probably come and burn some of the midtones just a tad. Might even want to burn the shadows on the water just right along this edge here just to get a little bit more contrast. Just a little tiny bit more drama because again, like in the last one, the light hitting the pier in the background is very strong. It's very, very strong. And therefore that's the thing that everything else in the image has to kind of work around. I like this tree branch coming into the corner here. It's not just like barely peeking in, or it's like really in there. And I love the way that this arc points your eye directly to the the pier, the building or whatever this is. You've got another one of those implied lines. It's really nice. So yeah, so you've done a nice job on these. I appreciate that you've been sticking to the adhering to the rule of thirds. I think maybe you're approaching it a little bit technically, and you're free to loosen up on that just a little bit. Be a little bit more artistic with your compositions. Use the rule of thirds as a starting point, not an end point, and take better advantage of the Photoshop. But and good work going black and white on this one because we really hadn't even discussed it all that much. So I really enjoyed looking at these. Thank you. Okay, and now we have Fernando's. So let's go ahead and take a look at his opening statement. Okay, and so here's our first one. Um, we've got a very kind of a horizontal focus on this one and some repetition. I think this is kind of interesting. These three little signs here, and there's, you know, like the two that are kind of together, and then this one over here by itself. It's kind of a fun play on the rule of thirds a little bit. It's a nice image, probably, you know, not necessarily the most interesting. You know, when we're using a lot of horizontality, and this is very dominated by horizontal line, um, it it's there's got to be a little something extra in there to, you know, kind of break up the monotony. And you do have that. You've got the signs in here, and you also have an interesting potential silhouette along the skyline with your trees. I'm almost thinking either get closer to the signs or get a little farther away, or something. I'm not sure. There's not really anything wrong with it. It's just could be more interesting. And you know, I think its strong point is there's just something kind of amusing. I'm not sure why, but there's something kind of amusing about these signs here. Okay, wow, 1 point perspective. Okay, that's almost perfect. Um, much more interesting than your first one. I'm sure everybody would agree with that. That it's leading our eye into much deeper space. Whenever we have perspective, we have diagonal lines, and diagonal lines are always dynamic. They always indicate movement, and so, you know, I imagine you're standing still when you took this. I don't know. Maybe you took it out of the back of your car, but I hope not. But I think it's very dramatic, and I like the light on this one. You know, this was the perfect weather, and the perfect time of day. Like when we have those really kind of dark gray skies, and then everything on the ground is kind of lit up. It's it's just perfect. And so really nice, you know, color balance on this one, and nice composition. Okay. Um, this one I think is also, it has potential. I think you're doing something similar where you're using a 1 point perspective, you know, to kind of lure the eye into this focal area here. It's a little bit like, oh well, when I get here, there's nothing to look at. You know, like it seems like this should be framing something, you know, a person. I'm not sure what, but it's a very nice picture. My only other you know, thing that I would criticize on this, and this has pretty much been consistent on everybody's, it's so hard to meter for both the sunny area and the shady area. And whereas this part is perfectly exposed, there's a lot of detail that has gone missing in these areas, and that is a super easy fix because you can, you know, selectively with a mask, you know, mask out the whole top part of it, where we like our contrast, and just play around with our settings in here using some kind of a brush. It's going to be hard to get a good selection on something as delicate as the edges of these leaves, but I think that this is something that, you know, some dodge and burn or some masking could make all the difference in the world, so that we feel like that we're a little bit more engaged in the picture. You know, we really feel like that we're standing on this ground here. The ground plane just does not seem as significant on this one. Okay. Yeah, this one, you know, I think you might be onto something with these very simple, um, you know, 1 point perspective things with the roads. You know, a lot of times 1 point perspective um, is very difficult to make it interesting, you know, because they tend to be very symmetrical. And when you've got a very symmetrical balance, and this is almost perfectly symmetrical. In fact, that line just almost goes straight up and down. So you did a great job on like an intentional symmetry. And then there's just a couple of little things in there that throw that symmetry off to give it that variety that makes it not boring. Whoops, you know, the arrow. I mean, it's just I don't know. The road ends, and then you've got this arrow, like you're driving, and then all of a sudden, you have to turn, make a fast turn right now. You know, the I had mentioned this in one of the other critiques, that the warm colors tend to push forward, and the cool colors tend to recede. And you know, you can really see that effect working here with the yellow signs. That is why signs are yellow, because not only is it scientifically researched to be the color that's the most annoying, or irritating, I should say, to the human eye, well, that means it stands out. And you know, you don't want your road signs to blend in or recede. You want them to get your attention and to really pop forward. And so you can see that the yellows really kind of grab our attention, and then the more subordinated areas are cooler and, you know, tend to kind of recede back. Okay, this is you know, another spin on that 1 point perspective. Um, I don't think it's quite as interesting as the two with the road. I can see where you're going with this one, and I like the narrative that's unfolding. You know, that you've got, you know, here we're standing here on this road, and way down there's this solitary figure, you know, and you've got the road signs even kind of pointing at the figure a little bit. If anything, maybe the figure is a little bit understated. What's happening space-wise is kind of interesting, because it's like you've got a close area here, and then it's like these two bushes here kind of serve almost like as a screen, or like a stage screen, and then there's this middle area, and so from here to here you've got the center ground, and then you can almost perceive these trees as being like a curtain, or you know, like a curtain on a stage. Yeah, that's very stage-like, I guess, and that opens up and then reveals an even deeper space. You know, so you really get the sense of walking through an opening and an opening and an opening. So the idea is great. It's a little dull, maybe because there's just not enough contrast happening. Everything kind of starts to blend together right in here. The sky's a little bit blown out. It's a great idea, and I think it's workable. There's not really anything I would say that's wrong with the picture, other than it just, there's something that is making it not as interesting as it could be. A lot of this could probably also be taken care of by getting some more detail. You know, bringing out some of the highlights, like I've talked about on so many of these in the shaded areas. But you know, you got real close to nailing it on that one. Okay, and then the last one, this is probably your strongest one. This is something I don't believe I've talked to you guys about yet, but it's almost guaranteed to get you a good composition every time. It's called an S curve. If you can get a line that draws a letter S or a letter Z across your picture plane, you're almost guaranteed a fabulous composition, because just the way it breaks up the space. So, you know, good use of the rule of thirds here. This line leads our eye in. Yes, I would like to see, you know, some highlights and some detail, you know, brought out in this area down here. Pick up that glow that happens at that time of day. You know, you appropriately, you know, you exposed for the sky, and if anything, you know, you could possibly even enhance the saturation just a little bit. But I think this is the perfect one to conclude with, also because this car uh, looks to be leaving us. You know, like it's the end of the road. You know, it's over. And this one's really nice. I think that this is probably the best out of all of them. But you've got something. You're hitting on something there that I would like to see you continue to explore. A very simple idea like this can sometimes turn into something really interesting if you spend enough time trying to figure out what you need to do to make it interesting. And that is a challenge, that you're taking something that is potentially very boring as a subject matter and you are finding ways to make it interesting. And I would encourage you to keep that approach going, because I don't think you've hit it yet. I like to do series, you guys, because things start to reveal themselves to us in the process of doing a series. And you start out with one intention, and a lot of times by the time you're into it, your direction has completely changed in a way that you weren't even expecting. And so I would encourage you to not just say, okay, landscapes are done, on to the next thing. Keep doing these. I'm hoping that you guys are planning on continuing to take pictures after you get out of this class, I would hope. So, okay, but nice work. And now on to the concluding page.